Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second of two sustainability webinars for this winter 2023. My name is Nora Fever, for those of you I haven't met, and I work with GMIST. And of course, being Grossmorn Institute for Sustainable Tourism, sustainability is certainly something that we're very passionate about and that we'd love to have discussions about. So we're really grateful today to have Dr. Rachel Dodds with us for this second of two webinars. I'm going to introduce her, and then we're going to jump right into today's topic. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And a quick reminder, in case I forget to mention it later, we will have a very quick little survey that will pop up at the end of the session. And please take a few minutes if you can to fill it out, just to give us a little bit of feedback so that we can use that for future programming or future webinars that we want to offer, whether it's on sustainability or something else that comes to mind. So just a quick reminder that it would be great if you could take a few minutes to do that. So we're really pleased to have Dr. Rachel Dodds with us this afternoon. She is a globally known expert in sustainable tourism and a passionate change maker. She's worked in the tourism industry, helping governments, businesses, and consumers make more responsible choices for the environment, communities, and the economy for the last 25 years. She's a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University and also the director of Sustaining Tourism, a boutique consultancy. So with that said, I'll pass it right over to Dr. Rachel Dodds for this afternoon's webinar.
Hello, everybody. So great to meet you. Hopefully this is going to work. And there we go. Really wonderful to meet everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I do want to let you know that I'm a big fan of questions, and I know that there's a lot of different types of people on this call. So before we just get going, I just have a quick ask. If Nora, if you could put the polls, who are you? I had a lot of comments about this webinar and a lot of people pre-registered. So I just want to see if we have the same kinds of people on.
Hopefully everyone can see that poll. We'll just give a few minutes to allow people to answer just a couple of quick questions.
Oh, great. And I see lots of people are from other. So maybe if you're not an accommodation, restaurant, festival, event, tour operator, community, group, destination, you could tell me who you are. And that gives me a good idea as well. Just pop it into the chat.
I was just going to say verbally, you've got a lot of representation here from ACOA, including myself.
Oh, wonderful.
Let's
so you
see.
Are kind of, I guess I should have put in another one.
It looks like almost everyone has responded. So let's have a look here.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have about a 50-50 of people who attended, who didn't attend. Just as a reminder for those who didn't attend, last time, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about all the different definitions of responsible tourism, regenerative tourism, sustainable tourism. There's so many. So we went over that so people had a clear understanding. If you're unaware of those things, or it's just all a little bit confusing, then I encourage you to go back and have a look at that and ask any questions. And then we also talked a little bit about where to start. From this, we had a number of questions that came up about how to get started or different specific elements. And so I used those to prepare today's webinar. I realized that ACOA is here and it's just a little bit of a different body, but so please do put things in the chat if you want to see different elements of those kinds of things. There we go. And it's great. Oh, good. We have an in-restaurant tour operator experience, all those kinds of things. So, and one other thing, I know that not everything can be covered today. So if you'd like, sorry, this poll keeps coming up in my way. If you'd like something specific, I encourage you to talk to GMIST specifically about that. And that was one thing, is that some people said we really wanted to talk about DMOs, and GMIST has said that perhaps they'll have a special session on DMOs are doing in terms of best practices, etc. So I will not be talking about specific DMO practices. This is more about how do you get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty. And a number of things came up from the notes and from people's comments last time that they wanted to talk about infrastructure and investment, HR and communications, suppliers, and benchmarking. And so those are the things I'm going to go through today. and give you just some practical examples and actually try to encourage you. Quite a few of the comments that came back were saying we need some business cases. We need to showcase how I need to understand how this is going to work or why it's beneficial for my particular business. And so that's what I wanted to focus on today. So again, not everything can be covered, but happy to answer questions. And also specifically for a DMO best practices, please just reach out to GMIST and Nora and say this is something you'd like, and we can put that together for you. So let's talk about infrastructure and investment. That was a big comment that came back. And, you know, a really easy thing is that you can reduce 15 to 20% of your energy and water with no adverse effects to your guests. And the interesting thing is most hotels, inns, restaurants, not always restaurants, but commercial buildings, they pay for their water twice, once to get fresh water in and then once to dispose of it. And so there's several ways you can use water more wisely to lower your costs. That being said, a proper return on investment calculation is important depending on your building size, investments, payback time, etc. So solar can be amazing and everyone talks about it, but if you live in a climate that doesn't have a lot of sun, it's not a particularly good investment. So it depends on what you're doing. So for example, a bigger hotel, one of the Fairmonts in Canada, they redirected all their water to compressors and in their ice machine to heat, and the domestic hot water and pool water all went through a compressor, and they reduced their water consumption by 30% just by doing that upgrade. So as the building got older, they realized it was worthwhile to put that type of investment in. But sometimes that's too big. So heat pumps can be a big investment, but if you're about to go through that kind of a renovation, then that's the kind of thing you can consider. If you're a smaller property, fixing leaks, changing your toilets are unbelievable. Usually it's a 10%. So just a dripping tap can fill a swimming pool over a year. So you need to also determine what's your budget, what's your investment, and what your owners, if you're working for someone else, what is the thing that they need in terms of a return on investment. Another area is Energy Star, which seems really, really simple, but the financial impact savings is about $1.30 a day. You add that up over a year, it can be quite substantial. The other thing to consider too is that when we talk about sustainability and investment from an environmental point of view, just only that, is that it's not just about replacing your toilets and your sinks and having sensors, which are all really great. But when you look at guest behavior, whether it's in a restaurant or a tour operator or a hotel, guests behave differently. So you may put a sensor and you may put in a thermostat into your room, but if you actually track it, you can see that some people use 4 times the amount of energy than other people. And so it's about educating your guests why you're doing things. And sometimes it's about changing your default option. If you give somebody the option to have control of their thermostat, chances are they'll put it higher than they would at home. But if it's automatically set at something and said, if you'd like it higher, please contact the front desk, chances are people won't bother to contact the front desk. If it's censored, it'll automatically shut off. Or if there's a key card that goes into your room to turn it on, it automatically goes on and off, and the savings can be quite substantial. It's kind of like having revolving doors versus a door that opens and closes. So good guest behavior is a key thing about cost savings. It's not just about the financial return. But when you talk about financial return, and I did say about return on investment, in Toronto, for example, they initiated a green roof project, and that saved $313 million in energy savings, which when you start putting it into dollar amounts, then people start to buy in for the return on investment. And that's how they passed it by council, is actually from the dollar amount. You can go further if you are thinking about retrofitting or building. Another thing to consider is laundry costs. Hotel in Lake Louise did a wastewater heat recovery system, and they collected the hot water from washing machines rather than draining it into the sewers, which is currently acceptable wastewater practice. The heat energy in the water was recovered, and they had 3 washing machines, but they recovered 85% of the energy use. So it estimates that the system, for example, runs 18 hours a day, produces an average of 17,000 liters of hot water daily, and saves 57,000 liters of propane. I mean, it took 2 days to install, and it cost them $60,000. But they reduced their carbon emissions by more than 80 tons annually, which is, from an equivalent point of view, it's the same as taking 17 cars off the road. But the fact that they reduced their energy costs by 85% was substantial. And This is the interesting thing, is that it had a time to take it off. I mean, in terms of the payback time, but they figured it was 5 to 7 years. And so for an inn, that was actually worth the investment. Now, here's the other thing. It doesn't just have to be about something really specific. And I wanted to share an inspiring story. So this is a winery, hotel, tasting room, restaurant, experience day trip in the interior of British Columbia. And the fire marshal came to them one day and said, "You're in a desert and you don't have a water tank. And if you don't have a way to put out fires, I'm going to shut you down. You have 90 days to do it." And the owner said, "Doesn't matter what it looks like." And the fire marshal said, "I really couldn't care less, but this is code and you need to have an appropriate amount of water to put out the fire. Otherwise, I'm going to shut you down." Well, he came back 3 months later and the fire marshal marched onto the site and, arms crossed, and he was really upset and said, "I don't see it," right? And he starts to take out his paperwork to give him a fine. And the owner said, "You asked me that I needed to have a certain amount of liters of water, and I do, but it happens to be 15 meters by 5 meters. They'd actually built a swimming pool, which served as a heat sink for their solar, because they have it on the roof and they're in a desert. They get a lot of sunshine. So it heats the pool, but they just equipped it with a hose system so it could be used in case of emergency." And so it's that thinking differently, that sustainability doesn't just have to be about cost savings. It can be about adding value to your property. A pool is an expensive endeavor, but they were going to have to put something up anyways. They didn't want to ruin their views for their guests over their vineyards. And so they just thought about the problem differently. And so I encourage you, it should be of value. And sometimes if you have to do something anyways, you can make it better for you. Now let's come back down to something small, composting at restaurants, for example. There's lots of different types of businesses. I didn't want to just talk about hotels. Every dollar that's invested into a program of composting generally saves approximately $7 for every $1 spent. So this was a review of 12,000 businesses across 700 companies in 17 countries. It included the sectors such as food, grocery stores, hospitality, canteens, restaurants. But just by implementing a compost system, that's how much money they saved, because it weighs so much money. The interesting thing is not every municipality, especially in Newfoundland, has a compost, but in some places, especially in Nordic countries, this was also the case. And a number of communities got together and said, "We would like a compost system, and here's the business case." And the municipalities then came back a little bit differently. So if it's not in your area, sometimes it's about asking for it. And the other issue is, this is a big company, but the same can come in any small restaurant, is with the increase in consumption generally, we realize that you can reduce your plate size or your portion size by about 15% or about 1/3 in size, and keep the same price, and your value doesn't go down. So TGI Fridays, for example, measured and tracked food waste, and they realized they were over-serving and that their portions were just too large, which in the States is pretty common. But it was just ending up as food waste, which they were paying for. And so TGI Fridays and a few other restaurants tried it out as a pilot, and it's now standard practice. They offer smaller portions, or they offer half-size options. So they offer a lunch size and a dinner size. So just things like that can reduce savings, keep your profit margins better, and you're also not wasting. So it's win-win-win for everybody involved. So now let's talk a little bit about HR and training. That was something else that came up. How do you actually engage your employees? And this comes up an awful lot. You can have one problem is that there's usually one person in the organization who really cares, but no one else maybe does. And if leadership comes from the top, then it's a much easier thing to do. But also sometimes there's leadership coming from the top, but there's no vision that's shared with the employees. And so employees don't necessarily understand the purposes. And so the transparency is key. But if you are either running a green team, which I'll talk about in a second, or you're the owner or the manager, it's having a vision and sharing that vision and asking for feedback. One of the key reasons why employees don't engage is because they don't feel that their voice is heard, or that they're not valued. And so it can change from how you do your HR, it can turn from how you do your training, or it can be something as simple as just changing something small. So for example, Rocky Mountaineer last year gave their staff a 1-year membership to Masterclass. instead of an actual thing of stuff. But it didn't just stop the buying of stuff. It allowed learning to take place, and employees felt like they were respected, that they got to choose what they wanted rather than just being given swag, for example, which oftentimes is just wasted and doesn't go anywhere. So when we're talking about green teams, almost all hotels have a green team now, bigger hotels, and there's a lot of information out there, and it's public. So, you can always copy someone else and then just change the things you need to change. I wanted to talk about one is the Chelsea Hotel in Toronto, for example. They have a green team. It's voluntary, but anytime somebody comes up with an idea, they vote on it and they give a prize to the best idea every year. Fairmont has been doing this for years, and their best teams won an exchange at another one of their properties, which was really fantastic. Another hotel I know has a green team, and they all work together, and whoever has the best team, has the best ideas for that month, gets to pick their shifts first for the following month. So the incentive for them to come up with ideas means they get something back. The same thing goes for festivals. A number of festivals across Canada I know have, there's a lot of volunteers that are needed at festivals. A lot of times there's only 1 or 2 full-time staff, if that. Well, the garbage removal is a big thing, or manning the bins, the compost recycling bins, to make sure that waste is separated properly. It's a big thing, and it's sometimes a dirty job. And so festivals will offer their green team or their environmental volunteers the best shifts, especially if it's a musical festival. So people will sign up for the easiest jobs first. If you signed up for the garbage removal job, for example, you got to get your Friday night and the headline band off and your tickets to the festival. So it was a win-win again. And the key thing is coming back to what benefits the employees. So just for an example, again, a retail store, REI, which is a big retailer in the States, realized that they were being not particularly true to their values with the Black Friday idea. And so a few years ago, they turned it into a PR initiative. But one of their employees said, I really don't understand that we're supposed to be talking about sustainability and outdoors and this kind of thing. And yet we're open on Black Friday and everyone's going shopping instead. And the management team said, that's actually a really good idea. And they shut their doors on Black Friday, and they gave every single one of their staff the day off and a pass to go into whichever one of the state parks they wanted to go into. Well, interestingly, that PR initiative from the staff alone saying this was really great, posting about it on social media, their sales online were just as high as everyone else had in person. But the employees felt valued, that their idea was taken to heart, and that they were truly working for a company that had the same values they did. And I think I'm pretty sure that has continued on. And the Black Friday, shutting their doors on Black Friday, became a thing. And across North America, a number of companies shut their doors on Black Friday and go outside instead. Another way to do it is engaging your staff or potential employees into education. And we're sitting on a Zoom meeting, so it's kind of hard to think, but they don't always work. And some of you are, typing your emails as I'm talking to you, or you're doing something else, and it's really hard to listen and just listen. So again, please put your questions in the chat. But Explorers Edge, which is a DMO, actually, for those DMOs, it's a region in Ontario, and they're engaging in regenerative tourism and sustainability, and they're trying to position themselves. But rather than just give a lecture every single time, they have all their staff, and actually my students are about to go up there, and I'm getting my students to do it too, is it takes about 45 minutes, and they put some pre-recorded videos to explain what they're doing, why they're doing things, with some questions at the end. And when you complete it, you get a micro-credential. And so people feel that they're getting something back with a congratulations and their name, almost like a certificate. And I understand that doesn't work for everyone. That works quite well for students. But for employees, at least they have some proof and they submit it. And when they submit it, then they maybe get something else for it. So there's lots of different ways to do training rather than just, you must attend this 3-hour training session. And so it's a different, this actually came, I think, from their staff saying, how do you want us to do this? How are we going to engage prospective employees coming to the region? And they said, well, why don't we just put this stuff online and let them do a micro-credential on their own time? And so that's what they did. Any questions about that? Does that make sense to everyone? Or are you all drinking your afternoon coffee? Okay, let's Let's talk about the next thing that a lot of people had questions about was suppliers and partners. How do you engage your suppliers and partners? And I wanted to share an interesting story. I don't know if you've heard about Plastic Whale, but it's a company based in the Netherlands. They charge 49 euros for people to sit on their boat and fish plastic out of the canals. And they are sold out all the time. And so sometimes it's about the messaging you have. But all this plastic that they then fish out, they then sell it to one of their partners, which is made into furniture and then sold, and the money comes back. So it's almost like a circular economy motion. And North Face, as a retail consumer, also did this in the States with a provincial park, that all the money, they did a big cleanup. They tried to engage their partners to say, listen, we need to keep the parks clean. It's not just about people picking up their garbage, but can we do an initiative? And so they did an initiative that all the plastic that was retrieved from the parks was actually turned into t-shirts by North Face, and then provided back, and a percentage of the sales went back to the company. So there was a value in it, but also a messaging. And so a bigger company had that ability far more than a small company, but it doesn't just have to be about size. Plastic Whale was very, very small. So for suppliers and partners, it's about offering incentives. And a lot of people consider the carrot and stick or mouse and cheese approach as the negative, but it doesn't have to be negative. For example, festivals, again, often provide preferred placement for food vendors that are offering organic. So they get to be in a better spot, which is all about a festival, is definitely the location, if they're abiding by whatever the festival has asked them to do. So this preferential treatment, sometimes it's preferential product placement, sometimes it's preferred advertising. It doesn't always have to be negative. And interestingly, I find for smaller businesses, if you're a festival or you're always looking for advertisement. And some people come to you, you do have the power to say, we are going to preferentially treat those suppliers or our partners which abide by our values in terms of sustainability. And so they get better treatment, or they get, better placement for sponsorship and things like that. And then you can do the voluntold approach too, which is fine. Another example coming from Ontario is Boating Ontario a few years back was getting barely anyone to participate in their clean marina program. And there was a lot of issues in terms of waste and invasive species being moved back and forth, and fouling waters, etc. And so the owner of Boating Ontario, which is a nonprofit, said, that's actually okay. You don't have to participate in this program, but if you don't participate in this program, your insurance premiums for docking at the marina are going to go up. It's really interesting. They now have a 95% compliance rate. And so the opting in or the opting out is sometimes better than giving people the choice. You're volunteering them to say, this is what we're going to do. You don't have to be part of it, but there's going to be a circumstance or an issue if you don't do it, which sometimes helps people take that step. So your suppliers may not want to do something, but if you offer it to them in a different light, it could be better. So again, it really depends on who your suppliers are and what they need to do to be motivated. But a lot of times it's being offered the option to do better, and that's enough. Just as another thing for festivals, all sorts of ideas and practices are online. It's free. It's called greenfestivals.ca, who offer fun facts, checklists, and what you can do with your vendors, what you can do with your suppliers. So I encourage you to look it up. And what happened at one festival is that they really wanted to work with their suppliers, but their suppliers kept saying it's too expensive. And so the company bulk bought all the compostable materials. Once they said, we need at least 10 people to buy in. The small companies said, fine. And they went in as a cooperative and they bulk bought all their compostable materials, which then lowered the cost for everyone else. So it also formed a little bit of a group commitment. And what I mean by group commitment, I was working at Mariposa Folk Festival one year, helping them with a waste audit. And so the coordinators went to the suppliers and said, do you think sustainability is important? They said yes. And so they said to the suppliers, well, what would you like to do? And it was actually all the food vendors that came back and said, we're going to self-impose a fine of $200 every time we improperly sort our waste. Well, we were doing the waste audit, and I found a cucumber wrapped in plastic in the compost. And the organizer came by and said, any infractions? We said yes. They said, I know exactly what supplier that is. 30 minutes later, when we did the next round of the waste audit, that problem was fixed. And so phenomenal, but that was a self-imposed practice by the suppliers because they all wanted to do something, but they knew what was going to motivate them. And the food trucks within half an hour sorted the problem. And we didn't have another problem for the rest of the 3-day festival. So quite an incredible group pressure to conform. So that's something else to consider. Can work both ways, so be careful. Now let's move to communication. And this is a key thing. We don't want to greenwash. There's a lot of greenwashing going on, and I think it will continue. But part of it is about communicating in the first place. So you need to have a policy that's public. And even if you're just trying, it's better to say that you're trying rather than to say an absolute. And I understand that policies can be a bit vaguer than internal policies, but it still means that there's a public commitment to try and do better. It's not also hard to write one, but the first thing is to decide what is important to you or your business. So I would suggest measuring your various impacts and then setting up goals and developing your policy from that. And it comes to benchmarking that we'll talk about in a minute. So for example, saying we aim to become plastic free by 2024, or we want to become a carbon neutral tour operator by 2025, or we endeavor to engage our stakeholders in their sustainability strategy and become an agent of change. Yes, a little bit vague, but being vulnerable about saying, you know what, it's now 2024 and we're 90% plastic free, but we're still not there yet. And there's these 3 things that we're going to work on is much better than saying we're perfect. And it's way, way better than not doing anything at all. So this is Intrepid Travel is a tour operator that is well known for being a B Corp and a few other things, but all their information is public and you can pilfer. For example, you can just take what you like from a lot of the other policies and adapt. And bizarrely, you could even type into AI chatbot now, I need a sustainable tourism policy. And what comes back is actually pretty good, which is a little bit worrying as a professor. But then you adapt to how it fits your business. So it doesn't have to be spending 2 hours crafting this wonderful sounding policy. Actually, AI can do that for you now. Another thing is contributing to what you believe in. So for example, for my company, I really believe it's about giving back to the planet. And the other day, it was a couple of months ago, somebody said, well, what do you do? And I said all these things. And I realized that I was just as guilty. You know, I'm not perfect, but I signed up for 1% for the planet, that I give 1% of my profits back to the environment. That's it. And they sent me a logo and I now put it on my website. It's a small step. It's definitely not enough, but it's sharing at least to say publicly, this is what I believe in. And so that's a start. That's relatively easy. It could be I am helping my community and in, you know, giving back. And we had this conversation at Destination Canada yesterday that perhaps with offsetting, people are talking about the issue and that offsetting has been extremely greenwashed by a number of different companies. And we see in the news all these offset companies which aren't actually offsetting at all. And I know a few companies that when they need to offset, the amount of money they give to a smaller organization to help them undertake community efforts or environmental initiatives. And that's how they offset. They said, we're going to help someone else improve. So there's lots of things you can do. And I understand profits are always an issue, but 1% is really not very much. The other thing too that's interesting has just come up, and I don't know many people know about it, and I can try and I'll send this, put it in the chat. I should have put it in the chat. Sorry, I can't copy and paste from this. Is that Google Maps, you can now enter your own sustainability practices. And so this is literally self-reporting, but if you don't already have your business located on Google Maps, I would suggest you do it. The amount of people who search for a coffee shop or a hotel or things in an area by just going on Google is phenomenal these days. And if you're not there, you could be potentially losing out on a lot of business. It's also free, but you can also share more than just your location on Google. So you can share your sustainability practices. You can share what else you're doing. You can share your reviews. And as we all know, this it's almost common practice these days. And so I encourage you to share your sustainability practices. Also, it then means that other people can say, hey, maybe I should be doing this, which is getting the movement going. So I also want to talk about benchmarking. And you have to measure what you manage. And we did talk again, this has been talking at a federal level quite a lot, is, who should we be using? What should we be doing? And Destination Canada is doing research, I think, on providers to share with the industry. There's also another initiative funded by TIAC and the Tourism Recovery Fund that is setting up a website for sustainable tourism experiences. So if you are a tour operator or an experience that you consider to be more sustainable, they have a number of different things that you have to say that you're doing, but then it's free publicity. And so that's something that there's other options out there that people want to hear about what you're doing. And that's another incentive from a communication point of view. Coming back to benchmarking for a minute, most people think it is so complicated. And it really, really can be complicated, but a lot of times you already have the information. So you do a profit and loss statement for your business at the end of every year. You could just look at your energy bills for that 1 year, pull all 12 at once and have a look and see where you go up and down and write down that number, make a few changes in the next year, look at the same number and see if it's gone down. That is even just the simplest form of benchmarking. And I encourage you to do it for your business as part of your business operations because it will just make you more efficient. And this goes the same for if you're an organization, right? If you're an association or a nonprofit or even a DMO, a lot of times we don't know if we're improving because we never really measured it in the first place. And it shouldn't be, we gave 3 more seminars. It should be, how many positive comments did we get back from our seminars? Or how many new stakeholders did we involve this year? Or how many of our partners are actually implementing more sustainability type practices? So the metrics are the things that are important rather than we had 3 workshops. I had 3 workshops and 1 person came, or I had 3 workshops and the same people came to every workshop and I actually got, the comments where everybody was above 85%. That's the kind of measurements. Coming down, this is a tour operator in Finland. I just did a piece of work for them. They are 1 person. They work with a whole bunch of suppliers, but they're 1 person and said, we want to go and get certified and we know we want to do something, but we don't really know where to start and we need a strategy. And so I worked with them and said, okay, well, first of all, we need to benchmark you. And I said, okay, I have a whole bunch of questions, answer them. Do you measure your waste? How much compost do you provide, etc.? And she's like, I don't know. And actually, even just after a few emails back and forth, I said, go look here, go look here. Oh, I didn't realize I had this information. And from those different questions, we came back to say, actually, you know what? She's doing really well on waste. They're doing really well on transportation, but actually their community engagement is not so great. And so from there came her strategy of these are the 5 things that we're going to work on in the next 5 years. And then went a little bit further and did for each of the indicators, one was tons of waste, just some things to start in terms of measure. And so the long-term measurement, we ended up putting timeframes on these afterwards, was to reduce waste by 50%. Over 2024 levels. She said she had a year to figure out what was happening. And then by 2024, they have to do different things. So really simple things, right? Eliminating styrofoam. You'd be surprised how many times you still see styrofoam out. Establishing compost in the office. But they were a tour operator. They then said, what else can we do? Actually, maybe we don't jump into a waste audit right away. Maybe we do these things first. And so it's about figuring out what are the easy wins you can do. What are the harder wins you can do? And then what are the longer term? But measuring it is key. So her policy came out. We had 10 indicators. We had actions for each of them. And where it was struggling, even I want to measure my carbon footprint, she said. Well, there's websites. I sent her a website. Here's how you measure your carbon footprint. So it's not just about doing everything all at once. It's about starting. And if you are a 1-person organization, that can be really tough. But if you have staff and employees or volunteers, ask them what's important to them, because it's so much easier when you have a few people working on something than 1. And it's not just about environment, right? It could be about a community initiative. It could be about your employees, could be about your suppliers. It could be about giving back to the community. There's all sorts of different things. And so I would say, choose 1 and start and then work on. If you're already established, you need to go farther on how to do things. The Travel Corporation is Canada's one of their biggest tours companies. They have 250 brands, but they developed a 5-point action plan to be carbon neutral by 2030, to have an animal welfare policy. They pin it all against the Sustainable Development Goals, but this is all free. It's all on their website, and they're willing to share with any tour operator that asks. Same thing as Intrepid. All their carbon strategies are all free. They're all on their website. They're happy to share it. If you're already at this stage and you already have your goals and measurements, you can go really hardcore. For example, this is the impact on a circular economy sort of donut model. What is the impact of each person and each area, from payroll down to investments, down to land use, and their policy is absolutely detailed. And I do have this link. I'll put this in the chat for everyone, but it's phenomenal, the kind of level that you can go to if you want to. But you have to decide where you are. So you may be just starting and have no idea. You may have been doing this for 10 years and you need the next step. There's always somebody who's doing it better, and there's always somebody who's doing it worse. So there's also a number of monitoring tools. There's a lot of free resources, and I could go into detail on all these resources, but I am just going to put some in the chat for you, and just, copy and paste them. Maybe you need a little bit more time, but if you want to understand how to calculate how much energy you'll save per room, and here's a guide, and it'll give you some ideas of, if I have this will be my return on investment. The Hotel Sustainability Basics by the World Travel and Tourism Council is a free tool, and it's, it'll tell you a little bit about what just are the basics. What can we do? If you want to measure your carbon footprint of an event or at a stay, again, here's a tool that will just let you sort of plug and play. Again, for measuring a carbon footprint. Much Better Adventures is another tour company that shares. Here's exactly how we did it. If you're a festival and event, I already told you about this. There's a toolkit that was developed. We just gave it. It's free. We didn't want to have any proprietorship on it. And I think that's a big thing, is we are all in different stages of trying to make things better. And so sharing and communicating is a really big thing. So the fact that GMIST is holding webinars for everybody to learn is great. The ability for collaboration and talking about things is really important, where we learn and share practices. It's not a proprietary thing. I understand if you're a hotel, you don't always want to share your average daily rate or occupancy levels with other people. But if it's aggregated and everyone's working together saying, we're struggling with this, how did you do it? You're not better or worse than anyone else, but sharing those ideas of, this worked for me, this was really useful, or I am in a really remote location and I'm really struggling. We don't have compost in our area. We don't have this in our area. How do we move forward? A lot of times there are solutions when we come together and work on them that way. So I would just, I would encourage you. The one that's on here, why environmental benchmarking will help your hotel. I wrote it 24 years ago for World Wildlife Federation, and it's still on the website, and it's still free, and it's still relevant today. It's really interesting. The best practices are actually still relevant and still encouraging. And Cornell also has a benchmarking. There's a lot of different tools out there. Part of the problem is we're just overwhelmed as businesses saying, oh my goodness, where do we start? And so these are just ideas to start. I would say, if you can do it yourself, amazing. Sometimes it takes a lot of effort and you just don't have enough time or energy at the end of the day. But sometimes it's about engaging your volunteers or your staff, or just putting up a team. Not everyone is engaged by the same thing, but if you have 2 or 3 people who really love the environment and 2 or 3 people who are really engaged by the community, maybe you have 2 sub-teams and you decide what's doable for your organization that's going to incentivize them to keep going, rather than just delegating a task and say, figuring this out, because that's not engaging for anyone. So those are the kinds of things, you can do it. And sometimes you just need a little bit of help, right? There are organizations, there are people who help smaller businesses do things. It doesn't have to cost you $10,000 to write a strategy. And, it's worth asking sometimes. And sometimes you can afford it, sometimes you can't, but a lot of times there's different tools and rates. And sometimes you don't need to do the whole thing for different people. So that's something to consider as well. You don't always have to hire, a hugely expensive consultant to help figure these kinds of things out. Sometimes you could ask your local college or university to do a project for your company on how to figure something out. I do it in every single one of my classes. Whoever asks me first basically is whoever gets it. And it's never for free because everyone needs a value. The value of nothing is nothing. But for example, we came up with a sustainability strategy for a hotel in one of my classes when I was teaching a sustainable tourism class. And the hotel gave the winners, a free weekend stay and dinner. And in exchange, they got a strategy out of it. I mean, in terms of value, it was pretty good. I've written case studies for accommodations. One of the reasons I know so much about Aruba is they gave me a free stay and I helped them with their benchmark. It was great, win-win for me. So those are the kinds of things you can think about. It doesn't always have to be monetary. The key thing is about value and what has value to you. So to some people, this is just a piece of ice, truly. But to others, people will spend thousands and thousands of dollars to be able to go and see it up close because they've never seen it before, or there is some value, or the value of seeing something in nature that's disappearing. Whatever it is, the key is to figuring out what's doable and start with one thing. So I wanted to open it up to questions. I know that some people are hotels, some people are tour operators, then we have Ocoa, we have a few destinations. I feel this is the time to really get you to ask me what's pressing for you and see if I can give you a little bit more guidance. So fire away. I'm quite happy if you don't have any questions, of course, because it makes my life easier, but I do think that everyone always has a little bit, and it is tough to engage with every different sector. So I just went on what the comments were. So please fire away. Out loud is wonderful. If you are too nervous, just put it in a chat.
I'm just looking at the chat here, Rachel, just to see.
Thank you, Max.
So I see there's one, I think maybe one of the links didn't quite work. So we might be able to put the link in there in the chat again. Let's see. Oh.
Just gonna stop sharing. It's a bit easier and I can see things.
There we go. So if anyone has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or just go ahead and unmute yourself. We've got, I think, a small enough group that we should be able to manage that.
Oh, I see a question from Natalie. Any ideas off the top of your head for a brewery? Yes, I think water is your biggest thing. The amount of water that you use is huge. And so looking to see what's currently being done in your area, if there's any incentive and retrofits and guidelines. I know in Vancouver, they were having the same issue at a gin distillery and heating as well. But seeing the return on investment, a lot of times if you're a small brewery, to retrofit and to put in heat pumps or something like that can be astronomical, but it depends on where you're at. And there are, in a lot of places across the country right now, there are incentives to do this kind of a retrofit. But a lot of times, even just being local and using that to your advantage. If you're a local brewery, you're trying to compete with the big beer companies, how you make yourself unique and different. So if you're using local ingredients, is going to help you because from your supply chain point of view, you're not importing them. You can use things that are closer to you. Part of the reason probably why your beer or whatever it is that you brew tastes better is because you're using local Canadian fresh water. So those kinds of things to have a look at. Can you reduce your energy? When are you using your brew times? In terms of day times, you pay different costs for energy depending on what time of day you are using energy. So look at those kinds of things. Even just a general benchmark at your utility bills will probably give you some pretty big cost savings off the top of my head.
Any other
and there's
questions?
a few really good breweries, by the way. There's some really good breweries. So I call it R&D, rob and duplicate, as we go and look to see what everyone else is doing. You take the ideas that work for you. And most of the time, we're actually pretty willing to share. I think
any other questions or comments?
Has done quite a bit. Sorry, I'll put this in the chat.
Okay, we have another question from Angela. Do you have an example of a destination or business that puts in place responsible travel criteria for visitors, i.e. pick up your garbage, recycle, leave no trace, etc.? I'm struggling to write this without sounding condescending. I think we know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and I mean, we had quite a few comments on DMOs, and I'm happy to do a session just on some of the different DMOs and their approaches. But off the top of my head, I would really have a look at Iceland. It's called Responsible Iceland or Educate Iceland. They have a whole website and YouTube videos designated to how to be more responsible in it using humor. It depends, right? Iceland has a pretty good sense of humor. Canada does too, but it depends on our visitors, and sometimes sarcasm doesn't go over so well. So it really depends on your visitors, but using humor is a way to do this. So they even have how to take a safe selfie. So it's called the Iceland Academy, and they have a wonderful array of very funny videos. But how do I dress properly for the winter? And they, they have some guy in his underwear, which is maybe not so wonderful, but they do make you laugh, but they really, really stick with you. Another destination that has done a very good job about being responsible travelers, Amsterdam. It's called, I'll put in the chat too. And Amsterdam has been leading the way, and they've had campaigns saying this is appropriate behavior and this is not appropriate behavior, and we will fine you if you do inappropriate behavior. And they realized it was their fault. To be fair, they were attracting the stag and hen do, stag do's, if it's called different things in different countries, and they were attracting these kinds of people, and now all of a sudden they get too many of them and they don't want them anymore. They started to change the hours their red light district was open. They started to change different areas. They started to put in place fines. They started to put in place monitoring, so that you had to buy tickets in advance to do things. They started to put capacity limits on things. They've done a number of different things. So yes, I definitely check out Amsterdam. Their videos, they even have videos that explain the process of why they did their Enjoy Respect campaign that you can find.
Wow, those are excellent examples. That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, fire away. I think the questions are always the best part. I tend to talk too quickly too, because I always think I'm never going to have enough time. That's my downside as being a professor too. 45-minute mark is when everyone starts to fall asleep. So you gotta start the questions right at 45 minutes.
I have a quick comment. I thought that some of the examples that you gave around like small things that you can do, and I think for a lot of us we're in Atlantic Canada, a lot of us are in rural Atlantic Canada, and it sometimes sort of feels a little bit intimidating or overwhelming to try to start, whether it's composting where we don't have the facilities and things like that. But I like some of the ideas you talked about, like around festivals and events, with sort of giving that preferential positioning, for example, to vendors who are doing sustainable things, whether it's composting, recycling, not using the single-use plastics, those kinds of things. I think that's a really great way to not only do things more responsibly, but to sort of be pretty direct in your messaging, to say, we appreciate this and we value what you're doing. And so I think those kinds of examples are great, and things that we can take back to our own communities or our own things that we're involved in, and try to, and it might take a while to sort of bring people around to that kind of thinking, but I think that's something that could be implemented fairly quickly and without really.
And it's amazing we don't do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the key thing from a sustainability point of view is we need to stop putting people down for not doing enough and encouraging people for doing something. That's a really big thing, especially for your suppliers and your staff. If your staff feel like they're not valued when they give an opinion, they're never going to give another one. And your suppliers, the same thing. If you point someone out and say, you know what, you did a great job, and it's not just about awards, we have so many awards, but about giving them something that's of value to them. I mean, some people love awards, don't get me wrong, but it's the same at me for work. If someone says, well, great, you published all these papers, I'm going to put your name in the newspaper. I don't want my name in the newspaper, right? Give me some more student hours to help me with my research, or give me a day off when I really want a day off, or, I don't know, give me a discount for the local coffee shop or something like that. Just figure out what's of value to me rather than what you deem as an organization is important. Sometimes it's just the listening piece that's really, really key. And a lot of times, really interestingly, at festivals, especially music festivals and community festivals, is the kind of knit community you have from a festival is so strong that people don't use that. And the volunteer appreciation often tends to be the same. And that's problematic. And so there's a lot of different ideas on that greenfestival.ca website. It's now owned by Festival and Events Ontario. I really think it needs to be nationwide, but it's a free resource, and there's a lot of stuff on there. And so if you're a festival and event, don't start from scratch. There's been a lot, and the festival community is happy to talk to each other. That's one thing that really came out of the research I did with festivals over the years, is the ability to collaborate and communicate is not always there. And I think the same thing goes. Hotels are probably the only ones who aren't the best about sharing. Everyone else seems to be quite happy to share.
Rachel, hi, thanks very much. Any examples of municipalities or at the municipal level where you have any best practices there, or any communities that stand out that implement, sustainable practices?
Yeah, I would take a look at Victoria as a city and as a chamber of commerce, as their mayor, as their communities. They have done an awful lot recently to work towards sustainability, engaging all their different levels of stakeholders. They just have become the first urban center to become a biosphere designated region as well. They've really been doing a lot of work. And again, they're quite happy to share what they've been doing. And so they really, from a Canadian perspective, have done some really great things. I'm sure there's other ones. I mean, I'm not a fan generally of Toronto in terms, I don't really think it's that beautiful, but there are 3 million trees in the city, which is, I think, more than any other urban place. And so some of those initiatives like green roofs were a collaborative issue. And it was sometimes the squeakiest voice is the loudest, but a lot of times it's a collective of I think every city, every municipality in Canada, if I'm not mistaken now, has a waste target of it. They have to divert at least 60% of their waste from landfill over a certain size of municipality. And I don't think that I think there are less than a handful across Canada who are doing it. And so when those measures become public, and as a municipality, they reach out and say, I need some ideas. Most people have ideas. They just have never been asked for their ideas. So that's something to consider. I'd have to think about it just specifically from a municipality point of view again, but I would check out Victoria first.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
We've got a few minutes left if there are any other final burning questions or comments.
Goodness me, is it all women on this call? I'm hoping not. Oh no, there's a few. It's just there. That's an indication of something else. I know it's also hard to come up with questions off the top of your head. You're kind of, mulling about it. So feel free to put them in I know Nora is sending out a survey at the end of it. Please put those kinds of things in. I wish we had talked about X, or I'd really like to know about Y. Those are the kinds of things that really help become a little bit more focused to you as a stakeholder as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I see Janice just put a comment there. Lots of concrete examples. I agree. I think it's great to have examples that are doable, in the short term, and things that you could do really without much or no investment, which is great. It's things that we can adopt right away. And I love how you said, it's about starting, and it's about doing something. And it can feel like there's so many things you want to do, but start small and start with reducing your plastics, or start with composting, or start with reducing your water consumption.
Right? Some people don't care about money. They care about something else. Some people are really motivated by money. So that's a key thing, is to think, what do I care about? Like, what do I value, rather than what do I think I should value? They're two very, very different things. So whatever energizes you and you feel passionate about are the things that you are far more likely to complete.
Absolutely. Oh, you're being invited here, Rachel, to
the Bumblebee Bright Inn and Brewery.
Inn and Brewery.
I'd love you, but I think my carbon footprint to come and visit you would just be far too extreme. But feel free to send me an email if you want. I can't. I was going to say, if you type it in, you can find some examples of most best practices. Not everything, but I tend to collect them. And if there's some burning question, then feel free to send me a message, and I'll ask you. If you start asking me thousands of them, I'll be like, no, now you have to hire me. But if you just have a one-off question or just something that you're like, who does this? Let me know. Right. I think that's an important thing, or connect with me on LinkedIn, and happy to help. I just want everyone to be better, and let's celebrate them. And if you're doing something really fantastic, then please tell me about it, and maybe I can share it on my website as well. Those of us suckers who've been trying to do this for a long time get really excited when we find someone new. So please share.
That's great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I think it was a great informative webinar. I think we had lots of ideas. I know I jotted down piles of things, so it's been very informative, and I really appreciate everyone's time in joining us. And I just want to thank Dr. Rachel Dodds as well. And don't forget, your survey should pop up, I think, as soon as you exit from the Zoom meeting. So really appreciate any feedback and suggestions that you might have. And we'll see you, I'm sure, on a future GMIST webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.